This is a story about an obsessed woman who fancies herself to be in a love triangle. Her victim, Larry Morrow, had nothing to do with the lovers. He was merely a pawn in her plot to win back the girl. It's Saturday evening, October 13th, 1984, and we are in Austin. Megan Spencer had been worried about her friend Larry Morrow since the night before. She and other friends were supposed to meet up with him in Austin at a club on Friday night, but he didn't show up and she couldn't reach him by phone. Now it was Saturday, and Megan stood in front of Larry's condo at 1506 West 13th Street, ringing the doorbell and knocking. Larry had invited her for dinner on Saturday evening, but his Volvo wasn't even there. She doubted that he was at home. Yet she wanted to try one last time before reporting him missing. A few minutes later, Megan Spencer stood in the lobby of the Austin Police Department waiting to file a missing persons report. Larry Morrow was Megan Spencer's best friend. They had known each other since childhood and had grown up in Bay City, Texas, which is the county seat of Matagorda County. And that's on the Texas Gulf Coast, if you're not aware. Morrow and Spencer both graduated from Bay City High School in 1970, and they both enrolled at Southwest Texas State University, which is now Texas State University in San Marcos. Both had graduated in 1974. Megan impressed upon the officer taking her report that she knew this man very well, and he was the most dependable person she knew. If Larry Morrow said he was going to be somewhere, he showed up on time. At that point, he had missed 2 appointments with her and other friends, and she was sick with worry. After she made the report, Megan drove to her home in Buda and waited by the phone. Hi, this is Brenda with Vintage Texas Crimes, and I just want to say thank you for following me and for watching my videos. Now let's get back to it. So on Sunday, October 14th, in the early morning hours, a teenager who lived on Summit Drive off Ranch Road in Wimberley, Texas, coming home from a concert with her friends. She was returning down, and she turned down her street, and she passed a fairly new gray Volvo on the side of the road, just sitting there on their street. So she woke her parents up when she got in, and she mentioned it to her dad and said, "Hey, there's a strange car sitting down outside, just down the road a little ways." And that was a strange occurrence. People didn't just pull up, leave their car on the side of the road, especially not a very valuable one that was brand new. That evening, the dad got out and did something at 7:30, and he realized that the same car was still sitting there. So he called the sheriff's department, and he had looked inside the Volvo, and a man's wallet and checkbook lay on the front seat. In the back seat were a couple of briefcases, but the doors were locked. A deputy came out and summoned a wrecker to pick up the car. Now, they couldn't open the trunk because there were no keys and there wasn't any way to open it from inside. They did get the car open, but there was no way to open the trunk from inside because if you are from that era, there used to be like an extra key that would lock the glove compartment where you could pop the trunk. And that's what this setup was. And since there were no keys whatsoever, the trunk was not accessible. The next morning, Sheriff Alfred Homan found a mechanic who said he could try to open it by sending an electrical charge through a certain circuit. Sure enough, the trunk lid popped open, and that's when they found the body of Larry Morrow. He looked at Morrow's driver's license, and he made a couple of phone calls in. The first call was to the police department and in Austin, Texas. Sheriff Homan found out that a missing person report had been filed by Megan Spencer the night before. He took her number from the Austin Police Department, and next he called Ranger Ron Stewart, whose resources could better address the case of a murdered Austin man in a car trunk that appeared in Wimberley. Now, if you don't know, Wimberley is in Hays County, southwest of Austin and north of San Antonio. It takes about an hour to get to either of the larger cities from Little Wimberley. Megan Spencer lived in Buda, which was about 30 minutes from where Larry Morrow's body lay. Now, the big question at that point was, really, why was Larry in Wimberley? Ranger Stewart arrived quickly. He noted that the victim's clothing was covered in dog hair. And when he called Megan Spencer, he asked her, "Did your friend have a dog?" And she said he did not. Megan came right on, and she arrived within the hour and was devastated. She identified Larry Morrow's body and told Stewart and Homan about Larry. She explained that while in college, he had worked for Brown Schools, a private for-profit boarding school with therapeutic education programs for teenagers who had emotional or behavioral problems. He stayed on with Brown Schools after graduation and was offered a position in its headquarters, which was in Austin. And then he worked there for 10 more years. We're talking about a stable, steady guy. He had gone to work recently with Landmark Investments, which was also in Austin. He had been there about a year. Megan Spencer also filled in the ranger and Sheriff Homan about a woman who lived on Summit Drive where Larry's car was found. That previous week, the woman, 44-year-old Elizabeth Marie Dommert, had been calling Larry and asking him to come to Wimberley. Dommert said she was out of her mind with worry about her former roommate and begged Larry to come and talk with her about it. Investigators wondered immediately why Elizabeth had been calling Larry about that in the first place. And so Spencer explained that Larry had dated Dommert's former roommate, a young woman named Lucy Brown, during 1983. So let's talk a minute about Lucy. I'm calling her Lucy Brown, and it's a fictional name. Lucy Brown was at the center of this crime, but had no criminal involvement whatsoever. Lucy Brown liked Larry Morrow. She had no reason to harm him. Lucy's only crime was giving Elizabeth Dommert the time of day years earlier. Like so many other predators, and that's what you'll see that she is, Elizabeth Dommert seemed like a nice and helpful person, but she was controlling, manipulative, obsessive, and malignantly entitled. She was a monster with the IQ of a genius. In October 1984, when this was occurring, she was already on a 10-year probation stint for a second-degree felony. She had broken into a fish and aquarium supply store in her hometown of Baytown 7 years earlier. It was 4 a.m., and she crept into the store with a cardboard box that she had lined with a trash sack, and she had begun filling the cardboard aquarium with water and fish. She was stealing fish out of the tanks and putting them in her box when she was caught. And anyway, that's just crazy. So when Larry Morrow's murder happened, Lucy was 29, quite attractive, and she taught school in a nearby small town. Lucy Brown had been Elizabeth Dommert's roommate since 1981, perhaps longer. My sources, which are primarily the Austin American-Statesman and the San Marcos Daily Record, said Dommert and Brown lived together for 7 years. I checked the Hays County property records and found that Lucy Brown and Elizabeth Marie Dommert bought a home together where they had both lived since at least 1981 until just before this happened. So they could have been business partners accumulating assets. They could have been roommates, or they could have been more, which is what I believe Elizabeth Dommert had in mind. But I don't know what their relationship was. It doesn't matter, but what we do know is that Elizabeth Dommert was obsessed with Lucy Brown. The month before, in September of 1984, Dommert had tried to keep her from moving out of their house. Lucy Brown was engaged to a dentist who I'm calling Dr. Dashgray. He was also 100% innocent in this crime. And Elizabeth was spiraling down. She was really, she was losing her mind. By the time October 12 had rolled around, Lucy and the dentist had been married for nearly 3 weeks, and Dommert was frantically trying to talk to Lucy Brown. But Brown was having none of it. She did not want to talk to Dommert. So Dr. Gray did a fine job of putting up a buffer, and so Dommert started carrying on and doing anything she could to get Lucy's attention. For instance, she pretended to be gravely ill, having just had a heart attack. She got this happened right before they married, and she got Lucy to come to her house and stay with her, and it was coercive. But after talking to Megan Spencer, Ranger Stewart, and the sheriff went straight to Larry Morrow's Austin condo and searched for anything that might tie him to Wimberley. Near his phone was an address book. Inside was the name Elizabeth Marie Dommert, and her home address was mere tenths of a mile from where Morrow's car had been found. Ranger Stewart and Sheriff Homan were back on the road from Austin to Wimberley then, heading straight to the home of Elizabeth Dommert. She was at home, and she invited them in. The first thing they noticed was how filthy the house was, or unkempt, and a lot of things going on in that house. There were piles of feces left by the dog, and dog hair was all over the furniture. Now, Stewart noted that the fur looked to be the same as that which was on Larry's clothing in the trunk. So he took off his jacket and nonchalantly laid the jacket right in the most hairy area of the sofa he could see, and made sure he got some of that hair on his jacket. So they talked, and Elizabeth said, I wondered when someone was going to come talk to me, because of the situation between Larry Morrow and Lucy Brown and her new husband. Well, Ranger Stewart said, well, tell me what you mean by that. Elizabeth Dommert told the men that Larry Morrow was desperate to talk to Lucy, but her husband, Dr. Gray, was almost certainly holding her against her will and would not let her talk to anyone. Dommert talked about Larry Morrow calling her, Dommert, constantly, wanting to know about Lucy, and she said he even showed up, now this is Larry, even showed up in the parking lot of the store where she worked, begging for Lucy's phone number. She said she told him that the number was at her house, and she would write it down for him and leave it in her truck where he could just come pick it up anytime. And she said, but she didn't know if he ever picked it up or not. Ranger Stewart was surprised, yet couldn't look away, because Dommert became quite emotional then about Lucy Brown and said Dr. Gray was no good, that he was no good for Lucy, and she was adamant that he was a terrible person and bad for her friend. She said when Brown married him, it broke my heart. Dr. and Mrs. Gray were soon cleared of any wrongdoing, and Dr. Gray told investigators that a man who said he was Larry Morrow had called his house at 11:30 on the Friday night in question, October 12th, and asked to speak with Lucy. He told the caller that his wife was sleeping. So that was that. Now, Larry Morrow's funeral took place a couple of days later on the following Thursday, and he was buried in the Rose Lawn Cemetery in Van Vleck, Texas, just outside of Bay City. On October 17th, which was 2 days after the investigators had been, the ranger and the sheriff had been to see Elizabeth Dommert, she had a blood clot in her leg, and she also had a circulation disease, which I'm saying that because she was in a lot of pain, and this could have contributed to some of her thinking, that wasn't right. Anyhow, her leg was amputated below the knee that month, and then things kind of went dead for a while. But in January of 1985, investigators quietly assembled the evidence against Elizabeth Dommert and said, we've got to do something to get a little bit more. We need to get in that house and look around, see what's in there. So Ranger Ron Stewart got with Megan Spencer, and she wanted to help him. So Ranger and Megan cooked up a plan that Megan would wear a wire and visit Elizabeth Dommert at her home in Wimberley. While Larry and Lucy had dated, Megan Spencer and Elizabeth Dommert had socialized with them at least 4 times. So it wasn't strange for Elizabeth Dommert to hear that Megan would like to drop by for a visit, especially since she knew Larry and Megan were best friends. And Elizabeth welcomed having a guest. She tried to be empathetic with Megan about losing her friend, and she said Larry was a very nice and gentle man. And understand this, Megan was wearing a wire, so all of this that I'm telling you now was recorded and played in court. But this is the sequence, the chronological sequence of events. Most of their conversation that day centered around Lucy Brown. Dommert said since Lucy had married, she had really hurt her. Her former roommate would not speak to her, and she had told horrible lies about her. Rumors had been spread by Lucy, according to Elizabeth Dommert, that she had only lived there under coercion. And she claimed a friend had told her that I kept her prisoner by drugging her. And then these stories just got more and more bizarre. Like she said that Lucy said she had threatened her with a gun in order to keep her from leaving. Brown eventually was able to leave the house under the pretense of going to teach school. You know, she had a job, had to leave. And this was when Elizabeth had faked the heart attack and said, "You've got to come to my house because I'm, having a heart attack." A couple of days after that went by, and Lucy was able to leave the house to go to school to teach. But instead, she met Dr. Gray, and the couple drove to San Marcos, where they were married by Justice of the Peace Becky Sierra. I believe all the so-called rumors were true, and that's why Dommert brought them up. It is a typical trait of an abuser to cast their victims in a bad light to divert anyone from believing what the victim may say in that situation about an abuser's coercive and controlling behavior. During the conversation between Megan and Elizabeth Dommert, Dommert said that Larry Morrow had called her at least 4 times. She didn't call Larry, Larry called her, and he wanted Lucy's phone number. He was becoming very aggressive towards Elizabeth, according to her. He just wanted to get in touch with Lucy really bad. Megan knew that couldn't be true because, well, for one thing, Larry had told her the opposite, that Elizabeth was constantly calling him. The other thing is that Larry had recently told her and their other close friends that he was gay. And Megan Spencer said this to Elizabeth, kind of like, that's odd because Larry said he was pretty sure, he was gay. He came out. So Dommert said, well, I knew that he was gay, but Larry just wanted to congratulate Lucy about the marriage. That just sounds ridiculous. So Spencer asked her, who do you think could have killed Larry? Dommert's answer sounded like a self-description. Who the hell could be capable of it, she said. That would be pretty cold-blooded. Even if it was a cold-blooded person, it would have to be someone who kills for the thrill of killing, someone who belongs in a straitjacket. And everyone in the county would know who that was. So now we're in May 1985. It's been about 7 months since Larry's death, and the wheels of justice were inching forward. A forensic lab determined that the strands of dog fur on Larry Morrow, when he was found in the trunk, belonged to Elizabeth Dommert's dog, based on what was on Ranger Stewart's coat or jacket, the same fur. So on May 23rd, 1985, Ranger Stewart executed a search warrant on Elizabeth Dommert's Wimberley home. There he found a briefcase with documents and a plastic bag, and in that plastic bag was a gun. Stewart sent the briefcase and its contents off to be processed, and the results were that the gun in the briefcase was the same gun that fired the bullet that killed Larry Morrow. In August 1985, the grand jury of Hays County indicted Elizabeth Dommert for Larry Morrow's murder. She was arrested and allowed bail so she could stay at home until her trial because she was in poor health. Elizabeth's trial started on May 20th, 1986. And it took more than a week to get through all the evidence. The prosecutor's theory was that at 11:30 on October 12, 1984, Elizabeth Dommert held a gun to Larry Morrow's head and forced him to call Lucy Brown's home to get her on the phone. Dommert wanted to speak with her. She was desperately spiraling out of control. When he failed to get Lucy on the phone, Dommert killed Larry out of rage. I will take that theory one step further and say if she could have talked with Lucy Brown that night, I believe Dommert would have said, you either come here right now or I'm killing Larry Morrow. I also think that she felt like after the phone call that she had to kill Larry because she knew she was already on probation. And if he told anyone what she had done by holding him hostage with a gun, that she may have been imprisoned for committing another felony, a false imprisonment or unlawful restraint. Basically, I've incorporated everything that was said in the trial previously. Elizabeth's mother perjured herself and lied elaborately to cover for Elizabeth Dommert, and saying that, she was with Elizabeth on the night in question and a VCR repairman had come to fix the VCR. And she described the man, and he looked nothing like that. And the man had been there that night, but he said Elizabeth's mother was not there. That was one little thing that was said in trial. And she was convicted on May 29th, 1986, and allowed to stay at home for the next few weeks because her sentencing would be on July 3rd. And the judge allowed her to stay at home because of her health. Well, on July 3rd, Elizabeth Dommert did not show up, so the judge sent an officer to her home. So at this point, she's living in San Antonio, so it was, a pretty good round for the guy to have to go pick her up there. The officer brought her to court, and when she arrived, she looked like she had just gotten out of bed and, in fact, had on her pajamas. She didn't even get dressed for court that day. And so, I guess they took her into custody right after the sentencing like they usually do. She was housed in Gatesville, of course, the prison there, and she died in a hospital in Bell County, Texas, about 30 minutes from the prison in January of 1992. Larry Morrow died because he answered the phone when someone he believed needed help called on him and asked him to come to Wimberley. By all accounts, he was exactly the sort of dependable friend Megan Spencer described, a man who showed up when people needed him. Tragically, Elizabeth Dommert used that kindness against him.